welcome back to another episode of the TFR podcast. We are back today to review the 2026 Dutch Grand Prix. It's myself, CHH, joined by Ewan today, and once again, it was another victory for Lando Norris. It seems to be a bit of a running trend at the minute. Every time you're here at the minute, we're on to a good streak for you with Norris victories, but it wasn't quite as simple as that. It was actually quite an eventful Dutch Grand Prix for once, which we never usually expect, but as it being the last ever Dutch Grand Prix for the time being, we'll see if it returns potentially in the future. It seemed to deliver another classic, and in many different ways, it's maybe set up the rest of the season for maybe a little bit more of a championship battle than we necessarily expected before the summer break. How are you doing, Ewan? And are you pleased? I'd imagine you are, but are you pleased with the way the Dutch Grand Prix went?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Looking forward to reviewing the race because I think it was quite an exciting one. It was pretty strategic, especially after the red flag with everyone going on to different tyre strategies. It was a fun one, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of the key details of this race.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I don't know, I think like over the years, Zandvoort, it's just been a little bit too narrow and a bit twiddly for the larger kind of ground effect cars. So then we've not necessarily had amazing races there because it's so difficult to overtake. But obviously, there was the chance that it'd be a bit better with these smaller new regulations, and then obviously the way the battery works now. But the sprint race on the Saturday kind of put a bit of doubt in my mind. I can't lie. It was such a letdown in terms of overtakes, and we had like basically none towards the front, apart from maybe Leclerc getting Norris for that one. And Russell went on to dominate it. It maybe set a bit of low expectations for Sunday, but then, like you say, we actually got a pretty damn good race in the end. I mean, it was a big shame for the home support. Obviously, Verstappen crashing out on the opening lap, but that kind of ended up setting the tone for a lot of strategy and a lot of pit stops throughout the race, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It was, I think, after the sprint, I think everyone was really expecting quite a slow, boring race because there was just no overtaking in the sprint. But I think that's mainly just down to there's no tyre strategy. And I think sprints, you can't do a sprint around a track like Zandvoort and a track like Singapore. It's probably going to be the same thing because there's just no tyre strategy. It's a track like Zandvoort, it needs tyre offsets to really make a race like that exciting, and that's luckily what we got on Sunday. But yeah, on the Saturday it was not an ideal sprint, and yeah, we didn't see much overtaking. I think some of two overtakes. I think Stroll made an overtake in the back of the field. So yeah, it was a tough sprint race to get through, but as we got through that, it was a really good race to watch. And yeah, of course, Verstappen crashing at the start. It was a bit of a shocker for him.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously mixed conditions, I would say. It wasn't quite a wet circuit at the beginning of the race, but it was particularly towards the end of the lap, wasn't it? Where there was a bit of where we got the banking at the final corner, and it had kind of heavy-ish rain before the race, and it seems to be the way all season so far, where if there's any rain, it's before or after the actual race sessions. We just haven't had any wet running at all this season, which I swear there was a season like this a few years ago, and we are having it all over again this time. And yeah, it meant that the track was dry enough, particularly at the beginning of the lap, but then by the time they got towards the end of it, it was quite a bit more treacherous. And I think to that point, it was a fairly tame start. We had Antonelli get the lead off Norris, who was on pole position. But then apart from that, there wasn't anything too chaotic further back. But then it was as the camera panned back to that kind of heli shot of down the start finish straight, and you could just see one car spinning off and then another car in the background, and you're thinking, what on earth has happened here? And then it was just that shock almost of it cuts to Verstappen's car absolutely in pieces, really. I mean, it reminded me a bit of Perez's car in, what was it, Monaco a few years back when he had that massive shunt going up the hill. And although like in some ways, it sounds like I'm simplifying it here, but he just kind of hit the wall, once, if you like. But when you saw that car initially, it looked absolute wreck, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It seemed like all weekend F1 was just about avoiding the rain. And
Yeah.
we were talking going into uh, this weekend about how F1 have not had a rain session this season, and it was kind of typical that we kept on dodging the rain. There was rain right at the end of the sprint, pretty much on the last lap for some of the drivers, and then there was rain at the end of qualifying as well. And that's why everyone did their lap a little bit earlier. And then, of course, we did get a little bit of rain affected running. I would argue that it was rain affected because we saw drivers having to um, progress with that rain and with that wet track. And yeah, of course, Verstappen is going to be kicking himself with that mistake. I would think because yeah, he was just took a little bit too much of the inside curb, hit the white line a little bit, and that was him out of the race. And yeah, a lot of damage. I'd actually be curious to see. They did this like Destructors Championship. I'd like to see
Yes.
where Verstappen actually is in that championship because I remember it was like Gasly a few seasons ago had zero bits of damage,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think Verstappen's probably winning the Destructors Championship this season.
Yeah, I think yeah, the table for that, particularly Verstappen and Red Bull, they've just shot up at big style because the amount of damage was pretty crazy. And you know what? I we have had a few discussions this season where, let's say maybe agreed and disagreed on whether Verstappen's made a mistake or if it's the car that's caused an issue of him spinning off into the wall. But in fairness, this time I do think this was a mistake from Verstappen, and I think that's a perfectly legit thing to say because with the way the track was, you can just see on its right tire, it just gets a little bit on that white line, and then immediately the car goes. Immediately it's gone, and there's almost no real proper way you're going to save that because it's gone in such an aggressive way, and that really just caused his crash. Really, as simple as that. If he doesn't have his tire on that white line, I don't think that happens. And particularly for a banked corner, I was quite surprised to see that. To be honest, like Max is, I think, as everyone would probably say, the best driver on the grid, and that was quite a silly mistake to make in some ways, particularly it being his last home race and all these other things. He'll probably watch that back and think, God, why did I do that? Why did I do that?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like you could argue the Hungary spin was also on him at the last corner because there was no uh, rear wings opening around there. So his last two spins have been completely on him. And I think to his standards, that is not good enough for Verstappen. And yeah, he is going to be annoyed at himself, but he's not really got the car to compete at the front at the moment. So that's probably the only thing that he's taking as a bit of a positive is that he's not really losing much because the car isn't very good at the moment. So yeah, it is. It's an interesting one. Verstappen obviously signed that new contract, so he is at Red Bull to stay. But yeah, he's going to be hoping that he can find some better results in that Red Bull.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just more felt sorry for those kind of local fans because you imagine, like, they're thinking last Dutch Grand Prix, what they would have been dreaming of is a Verstappen win and, him winning that last race. And that genuinely couldn't have gone any worse for them in terms of, like, he's not even made one lap. And right in front of that great big grandstand, yeah, it was, in the end, a bit of a weekend to forget for the Dutch support. And Verstappen did say he'd actually felt quite ill all weekend. I don't think that's got anything to do with obviously his crash, but I think just not quite, the nice send off that he was hoping for. But obviously with this crash, what I was expecting was that all these cars behind him, because he was in like fourth place, fifth place, roughly about that point, we're all going to pile into him because he's in the middle of the track. It's a little bit like I was saying it when I was watching it. It's when you have a crash in IndyCar or a NASCAR on those oval kind of banked bits where it's almost impossible to judge where to place your car. And we had this because obviously Gabriel Bortoleto spun behind, and there's this great clip, the onboard footage of Nico Hulkenberg with cat-like reflexes. You can see the puff of smoke from Bortoleto's tires. So he technically can't see where his teammate's car is, but somehow, Ewan, he manages to react in a split second and somehow dodge his teammate, because that could have been equally a total disaster for Audi.
Yeah, I mean that was pure driver instinct, I think, from Hulkenberg to avoid that and dodge that because he was completely blind into a few seconds when he was going into Bortoleto's pathways. So yeah, that was I would say between luck and skill. I'm not too sure. I
Oh, come
think
on. Let's give him this.
it's
Let's give him the
pretty.
benefit of the doubt.
I'd say maybe 80-20
Yeah,
skill.
yeah.
He did a
It was
really
pretty
good
lucky though.
job
We'll give you that
uh,
because he can't
to
see the
avoid that.
car. Because like,
Yeah,
let's be real. Like, there's no way he knows actually where that car is because there's
yeah.
literally smoke everywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of a little bit lucky to where he positioned his car, that he
Mm,
was just further to the left to avoid that. But yeah, it was unfortunate for Bortoleto spinning, but he had a terrible start before that as well. We
yeah.
got an onboard of him, and he lost about 5-6 positions just on the first sector, first two sectors alone. So his start was not going well before that, and to end up he spins and ends up not getting points. So yeah, it was a difficult race for Bortoleto, but Hulkenberg was able to actually pick up a decent amount of points. So the Audi is still pretty strong.
This is the thing. Yeah, Hulkenberg finishing well inside the top 10. That would just not have happened if he broke his front wing or something from hitting Bortoleto there. And so, yeah, in that, it's crazy how in some races, in a split moment, you can go from that kind of hero to zero, just from, in this case, literally millimeters in some sense. But yeah, the we had the red flag, first red flag I think we've had for a decent while. By
Monaco,
the way,
I think.
was it Monaco this
I think
season,
Monaco is
or
last
a few seasons
this
back?
season
This season,
because it was a red flag for the road service.
of course. Well done. I would not have remembered that. Yeah, it
Mm.
was the breaking up tarmac. Of course, it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of like, yeah, it was for that. I can't remember the last massive crash we had though. In some
Mm.
sense of like that. That's someone for whoever's listening. They can dig that one up. But so yeah, we had quite a long break until they got back going. But then what this kind of meant is that the strategy was out of the window in terms of like mandatory using a certain the different compounds of tires. And you know what? They were all saying on Sky Sports and F1 that, this is a simple one stop strategy race. They'll be going from medium tires to hard and whatever. It could be any further from that, wouldn't it? It was literally like two stopper and maybe could have got, well, we had a VSC in the end, which meant a free stop was even viable. I mean, what a good race for strategy it actually became. And it makes it so much better because we've got a bit of unpredictability where we haven't necessarily got a track that's brilliant for racing, but you replace that with a bit of strategy and suddenly it spices the race up like tenfold.
Yeah, definitely. And for Piastri, it was full stops. So
Yeah, yeah,
it was quite a stinker for Piastri's strategy. But yeah, the strategy really made this race, I would say. I was saying earlier that tire offsets are key, and that's exactly what we saw.
yeah.
And I honestly was expecting, alongside with what Sky was saying, I was expecting everyone to go on hards because we've seen so many times before the Pirelli tires just don't wear. So the quickest strategy is to just go hards to the end. So to see all the different tires come up, it was refreshing to see, and it really made the race. Like Norris on Sauce, but his teammate Piastri on hards. Like I feel like that's the first time in ages that we've seen Norris and Piastri go for a different strategy, and it is refreshing to see because we saw strategy at play and strategy ultimately won that race for Norris because he was able to use his pace when he was out of that dirtier of Antonelli. When he had to box earlier, he was forced to box earlier because Norris was so close behind. So yeah, it was a really good to watch, really fun to see all the strategies work out. And naturally, when you're gonna have strategy, you're gonna have overtakes because people will have tire offsets. People might not be boxing. It just adds another variable, which makes the race a lot more exciting than if it's just a one-stop medium to hard.
Absolutely. And yeah, it just shows it's quite nice that actually you couldn't predict what was happening because like they had Bernie Collins there for Sky, and she's usually the go-to in terms of strategy and what's going to happen between each of these teams. But actually, what she said, the total opposite happened, and you know what? I actually think that's quite nice for a change. Of
Mm,
like, no one actually knows what's going to happen here in terms of like
sure.
how long each tire is going to last. Because initially, Piastri was on that hard tire, and I was thinking whilst watching that, oh, he's going to probably go a long way into this, and he actually could be a bit of a threat later on because he might not even need to pit. But
Yeah.
then, how far from the truth was that? I mean, like you say, he made 4 stops in the end, and really, it was a total pot luck in some ways. So please, F1 and Pirelli, do this again. Whatever you did to tires for Zandvoort, Spain this season, I could probably think of some other races. Do that for most circuits because there's some other tracks. If that was like that most weekends, where there was maybe a slight bit of change each time, but we had this kind of close, thing between you could do a one stop or a two stop or three, and at least two of those three are very close on the delta. That suddenly makes such a better race. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 2012 season when people talk about like the multiple different winners, but the racing was actually great because the tires were so unpredictable, and so like it's not the most exciting thing, but it actually creates an exciting race because you don't know what to expect when you put the TV on to watch that race. You got a bit of a mix up of what could happen, and obviously, in the end, some would argue that's what got Lando Norris this very important win because it looked as though Kimi Antonelli got in the lead, maintained the lead after the restart from the red flag, and then Norris seemed a bit stuck. He had the pace, but he just couldn't quite find a way past that Mercedes. And you have to say the Mercedes probably do have the best battery on the grid, so they're probably able to just deploy all of it down that start finish straight. So Norris was really struggling to find a way through, but by doing a much longer stint on his second set of tyres, I believe, that allowed him then to do that almost an overcut, and in the end just had such better performance and was able to get the job done, wasn't he?
Yeah, definitely. His pace was just unbelievable on Sunday, and I think this was one of Norris's most complete drives, and one of his best, I would say.
Mm.
Because we one of his best wins, because we've seen his wins before. Most of his wins have honestly been him out in front, driving ahead. Because once he's out in front, he has the pace to drive away. Uh, this is one of those races where he did have that pace, but he didn't quite have the track position. And his job was to regain that track position, and he did it superbly with that move into turn one. One of his best moves, I would say, and
Yeah.
a huge move for the lead of the race. I don't think you can understate that. A move around the outside at turn one, I think, yeah, that was one of his best moves. And if that doesn't get overtaken a month, I'm not sure what will. Because yeah, that was pretty phenomenal. And of course, the tire strategy worked wonders with that tire offset um, against Antonelli. And like you were saying earlier, with like the strategy not being predictable, I was pretty shocked when Antonelli boxed
Mm.
onto his next set of tires because I was thinking Adelaide was going to stay out for a little bit longer and just wait for Norris to do something. But yeah, it was unpredictable, and I think that's what made this race what it was. But yeah, of course, Antonelli. had a decent race, but as soon as he went to the inside of Hamilton, Norris swooped around the outside, and yeah, a pretty brilliant move, and that led him to win by over 10 seconds once again.
Yeah, it was a great overtake from Norris. You're absolutely right there. I also think the other element to that was because of Hamilton being right there. Hamilton obviously had
Yeah.
stayed out, was on knackered tyres, and they were both catching him at a rapid rate of knots. And for Norris to do that whilst Hamilton's car is like in the way, in a sense, I think makes that move even better because he's got to then gauge, oh, well, I can't get too close to Hamilton because then I'll have to back out and then Antonelli just drive straight back past me. He got it to perfection where he goes sweeping right around the outside. Antonelli opened the door on the outside for him to do that, but he managed to just get it done clinically enough that I'm tucked in front of the Merc and I'm not going to get stuck behind Hamilton. And yeah, I think I've seen this comparison made, and to begin with, I was a bit like, it's a bit early for that. But I keep seeing Norris compared to like a younger Vettel, in terms of the driving style and the way he wins races. And I'm starting to see that a bit more now, where, yeah, those years when Vettel was at Red Bull, he would do this, where he'd get out in front and then he just builds that lead. And it reminds me of like Mexico last season, where in a different way, because he basically led most of the race. But when he gets out in front, there's like no stopping Norris. He just gets off into the distance, gets a real good pace going, and they just can't match it. And he ends up winning the race by a healthy margin. And how much is this to be said? Credit where it's due to McLaren, because McLaren have got that car now. Again, this circuit is quite similar to Hungary, so we need to see what they're like in Monza. But it proved, though, Hungary wasn't a fluke. They've rocked up here after the summer break and they're straight on the pace and able to win again.
Yeah, definitely. And it was quite interesting, really. I was reading a um a post on a website, an article about the McLaren's pace, and it was quite interesting because of course they didn't really have the pace in the sprint, and they had
Yeah.
terrible tire degradation. Um, and yeah, that really cost them, but they were able to turn it around just through setup to really get that car performance. And I feel like that's quite a huge gain in performance just through setup. And I think, and that's not even through upgrades. So that's a testament to McLaren's setup analysts and stuff. It's yeah, it was a great job from them, and it was interesting. It was that McLaren were good in the high speed, but that was really like turn 7, turn 8, but that was really affecting them with the tire wear. So they had to get with a balance where they were still quicker than Mercedes in the high speed, but they got the tire wear under control, and they were actually able to do that as shown. So it was yeah, it was interesting, and a good operationally from McLaren to really give Norris what he needed for the race win.
Yeah, I know what you're saying actually, because I saw or heard Nico Rosberg talking about this a little bit, because it was to do with the tire camber in the sprint race. The way they'd set up the car with the tire camber was that it was very, very good for one lap pace, but it seemed to scrub the tires way too much. It was just pointed a bit too much, where, yeah, they just end up wearing the tires out way too quickly. They readjusted that tire camber and obviously probably other things for the main qualifying and race. And it's amazing the difference that made, because suddenly then they were able to just be on top of the tires, completely under control, and are able to unlock the pace at the same time. So, like sprint weekends, I'm not a fan, and I am going off them more and more as we have them, because I feel like it spoils a bit what we have to come. But this is one good thing with sprint weekends, where you can have that sprint race where they might not get something right, but now they are able to change the setups between the sessions of the sprint and the main qualifying. It shows that you can really unlock the potential in the car by what you get from those two sessions before.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's one of the beauties of F1 in general is the setup aspect of racing, because it can change so much. And that was a complete example that McLaren changed the setup and they were suddenly race win beaters. So yeah, it's a really interesting aspect, and yeah, it's interesting how they didn't get it right for the sprint. But from what they learned, they were able to produce a better race car in the full race sessions. So yeah, let's see if that translates to the tracks like Monza, which I do not think really that Monza will be a track where McLaren will be winning at all. I don't think they'll be challenging for the win at all. I think they're going to be back to where they were pre-Hungary. Um, but let's see. Let's see if that
Never know.
pessimism goes a different way. Because look, McLaren, we haven't seen these upgrades happen at a track like Monza yet. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, very interesting.
Could be surprised. Could be surprised. But yeah. Elsewhere though, there's a little bit of drama towards the end of the race because we had a late virtual safety car for Esteban Ocon retiring, at the kind of first banking turn three/4, whatever it is, and this virtual safety car ended up meaning there was some late pit stops for Kimi Antonelli and both Ferraris. I thought that was a bad idea doing that for Leclerc, and I don't know. It made sense for Hamilton because he had extended, like we mentioned earlier, and he kind of had to make this stop, and it actually came at a pretty good time for him in terms of getting a fresh set of boots on. But Leclerc then double stacked behind him and ended up just losing track position to him, which at the time when I was watching that, I was a bit like, why did they do that? But they did it anyways, and they brought Antonelli in. But then we were thinking, oh, Russell has stayed out. So Russell then inherited P2 and then had the chasing pack of Antonelli and both Ferraris hunting him down. And I'm, almost thinking, be rubbing my hands together here. We're going to get our Mercedes battle again. And we're completely denied because, yes, Marcus Dudley, the race engineer for George Russell, jumps onto the radio and tells him he needs to let Antonelli through into turn one. What did you make of it, Ewan? I can already see you're shaking your head, and I would be doing the same if I wasn't talking right now because these are two teammates going for the championship, and only 10 years ago to this season, we had the final season of the Silver War, as they call it, between Hamilton and Rosberg, where you had two Mercedes drivers absolutely fighting tooth and nail, and bar one moment at Monaco when they did swap positions for the team, this would have never happened in a million years. But here, George Russell, despite questioning it a little bit, just opened the door for Anthony, and there he went straight past him. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I cannot believe this, and I can't believe that there hasn't honestly been that much uproar on the
Mm.
socials, on the social media, because last season there was so much uproar of Oscar getting back past Norris, oh Norris getting back past Oscar, sorry. There was so much uproar about that. There was little to no uproar about this, and I'm so confused about that because it's just a blatant swap because of a strategy that like Antonelli's side of the garage have chosen to do, and Russell is in this championship, and he was looking good. Like the softs weren't honestly that quick. They weren't that much quicker than Norris's hards. So he was. I think Mercedes would have easily been able to see that those softs were never going to be able to catch the hards of Norris. I just have no idea how that was allowed to happen. I get why Russell probably allowed this because Mercedes probably told him that Antonelli's racing for the lead, and he's got pace for the lead, which he obviously didn't. But Mercedes probably would have said that to Russell to get him past. So yeah, it's pretty baffling, really, for Mercedes to make that call in a heat of a championship battle. Russell needs to get these 3 points over Antonelli, get these few points, because every point matters in a championship. We saw that just last year, only 2 points between Norris and Verstappen at the end. So yeah, pretty pretty crazy. But of course, Antonelli does take second, and who knows, he probably would have overtaken Russell by the end of the race, but it would have made for a more exciting end of the race.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you did right. Antonelli would have caught and passed Russell. But the problem is here is Mercedes essentially lied to George by
Yeah,
saying that, oh, yeah, this is for the win, when they very well knew that Antonelli is not going to catch Norris for the win. And when George asked the question on the radio, there was radio silence. They did not answer that question clearly. And, I actually thought, oh, maybe F1 have they've edited that out and it's just like, it's not on the thing. But no, there was nothing, absolutely nothing back in terms of, just like, why can't they even just be honest about that and just say, you know what, he's not going to win the race, but we don't want, you two to crash into each other or whatever. And, we would just want a clean pass for Antonelli and that's it, because there's a massive tire difference and, we want to just get a car on the podium at least. That is all they had to say. And I hate that Mercedes there, and it's not his race engineer's fault. He's just a messenger, really, for Toto Wolff and the others of what they want to happen here. But this is just what I've said before about, like, there is almost such a bias in that team towards Antonelli. And I will say it's a bias because George, for years now, or a good few years, has just not had a fair treatment at that team, unless he's been, destroying his teammate, which he was last year. But as soon as Antonelli's came, as on par on pace, he's just not had a fair shot at things at all, and not the same kind of treatment or anything. And I think like what you were saying there, Ewan, about like the fact that there's not been much of a kind of hoo-ha made about this. And I think that's because like there's this bizarre narrative of a lot of people not liking Russell and, like almost wanting Antonelli to win the championship. And, each to their own, whatever floats your boat. But like, yeah, last season at Monza, there was the cock up from McLaren in terms of Piastri and Norris at Monza. And people made a huge deal out of that when it really didn't matter at all in the end, and it wasn't that big of a deal. It was a genuine mistake with the tires and when put them on the car. This wasn't anyone's mistake. That's a choice to bring
yeah.
Antonelli in, and you guys have put yourselves in that position. So then you have to let them sort it out on the track, and this is where I just lose a lot of respect for Mercedes because if, like I say, that was 10 years ago, Ewan, they would let those two drivers scrap it out and do what they had to do. And then here we are now, where, by the way, they've still got a huge lead in both championships, and they still couldn't even just let them sort it out in the circuit. And it's not even like these two have crashed with each other yet. If I'm right in saying here, they've not actually had a tangle yet.
Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't a fair battle,
Yeah,
really, for Russell, and I do hope he behind the scenes protests that
yeah,
in the
100%.
debriefs, because yeah, I think that's quite. I think there's going to be a sour taste in Russell's mouth and Russell's side of the garage mouth because yeah, I feel like whoever made that call, that just shouldn't happen really because they're still fighting for a championship and you put it perfectly. The McLaren strategy last year, that was just a complete mistake. The pit stop, it was a slow pit stop, and that was not expected to be happening, and that allowed Piastri to get ahead. This, yeah, like you said, was a complete just choice, and that's why I don't get why there's no uproar about it, because there should be an uproar because it was a choice, but they've just cheaped Russell out of fighting for the P2 by giving Antonelli the position for no real reason at all.
Yeah, and again, it's the way they went about it. Some people have already been saying, "Oh well, why didn't Russell stand his ground a bit more?" And yes, he probably could have. But he probably knows himself. He has to tread a bit on eggshells here. He can't just completely burn his bridges because
Yeah.
that stuff's been done before, and Mercedes will probably very quickly turn against him. So he knows that he can't go too far on this. But they've not even told him that like he's not actually fighting for the win here. By the way, so they've given him that false narrative for kickoff, and so he's thinking he's helping the team. In the end, I was actually, I was so glad in a non-biased way that he actually held on to the podium because he almost deserved that because of the way that played out. And, the Ferraris were much quicker and on much better tyres. But you know what? Fair play to George. He actually managed to hang on. And I was actually surprised he got on the podium because I was thinking, you've sent like a lamb for slaughter here. There's no way he's holding off them. But he actually did. And I don't know, it annoyed me. I'm not even surprised anymore though. I've ranted about it already this season, and I just think like there's an element there of like George is just almost destined not to win this championship. There's just so much that has gone against him, or it's just not going for him to become, the champion this season. And you look at that gap now, what, we 60 points between Antonelli and Russell? I mean, we're thinking it's going to take a monster kind of comeback for that to suddenly turn around, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this weekend was a step forward for Russell. I think his issues have been
Mm,
solved. So he was closer and he was right in the mix this weekend. And in the sprint, he got a sprint pole and he won the sprint. So
yeah.
that was a product of that. In the main races, he just kind of went missing a little bit in terms with Antonelli. Um, and Russell's going to be frustrated because he was right in the mix, but Antonelli is once again on a one-on-one fight, like in general in qualifying, has gone back ahead. So yeah, it seems like a real uphill climb. It feels like after Spa, really, for Russell when he getting spun into the gravel. It feels like after that you're really like, is this really meant to be, or is this just a season that's gonna be what could have been for Russell? So yeah, it's unfortunate for him because of course he's been at the Mercedes team for so long, and this is really his first opportunity um, in that car to really fight for the championship. But yeah, it just seems like one circumstance comes after another in terms of either it's the team just allowing Antonelli to get back through because of a strategy blunder, or it's just getting spun around, or its engine blowing up. So it's one circumstance after another for Russell, and it seems like it's just not quite going his way this season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's given me similar things of vibes, shall I say, of Norris Piastri last season, but this is I think way worse than how Norris was kind of struggling, if you like, at a certain point last year. And that car's just not maybe as well. The McLaren wasn't necessarily more dominant, but it was more like it had
Consistent.
reliability. Yeah, exactly. More consistently getting them wins week after week. When Mercedes, you can't. Well, as they haven't won, for a good few races now. It's been a while since the last one race. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. I mentioned obviously the Ferraris weren't able to get ahead of Russell. They had a little bit more of a quieter weekend. I would say it was maybe a little bit under par for them. Leclerc got second in the sprint. Hamilton did struggle quite a lot actually in the sprint race and sprint qualifying, but seemed to come back in the main sessions. But then was behind Leclerc for most of the race until he then ended up ahead of him because of the virtual safety car, like we mentioned earlier. Um, there was a bit of slight conflict, shall I say, between the two drivers after the race because we had a bit of issues earlier on with Leclerc being ahead of Hamilton and Hamilton complaining a lot on the radio that he needs to get out of the way, which didn't happen until Leclerc eventually pitted. And then at the end of the race, Leclerc gets behind Hamilton, then pulls alongside him actually after the checker flag, and you can see on the onboard that he's looking over and then shaking his head in a kind of disapproving way. What do you make of that? Anything in it, or is that just a little bit of heat of the moment?
I think it's a bit of both. I think just in general, I think it was an operationally pretty poor weekend for Ferrari because, of course, in qualifying, they went out at the worst conditions right at the end when the rain was falling. And then, yeah, in the race, they just took too many laps to make a decision for whether to let Hamilton through on Leclerc. And I think that thing you're commenting on at the end of the race, I think I interpreted it was that Leclerc was going to see if Hamilton like waves him by, or like
Oh,
says like a wave for respect. But that didn't happen. So I think that's why Leclerc was um, shaking his head. So yeah, it's a little bit of conflict, but I think there's no real. I don't
storm in a
think there
teacup.
would be any. Yeah, I don't think there'd be any hard feelings at Ferrari after that because I think Hamilton would be more annoyed at Ferrari for that because he was losing a lot of time by staying behind Leclerc. Hamilton was clearly faster at that point in the race, and it took them 3 or 4 laps to make a decision, either box Leclerc or get him out the way, and they chose to box him. So yeah, it seemed like a bit of a nothing weekend for Ferrari. They did seem quite close, and I think honestly, I think Leclerc had one of the best race paces, but I think they just had the issue of being stuck in dirty air of other cars, and they weren't really able to stretch their legs and really use the pace. So yeah, an unfortunate one for Ferrari, but fourth and fifth on paper doesn't look good. But I think um, looking at it, I think they had pretty good pace.
Yeah, yeah, it's potentially a missed opportunity for Ferrari, but they come away with a fourth and fifth. Oscar Piastri again, very much off the pace, and a bit of a bad strategy as well. But he was about 30 seconds off Norris come the end of the race. Liam Lawson, with the sole remaining Red Bull, finished seventh place, just continuing really what Isaac Hadjar was doing before. He was actually a, quite a way off though. He was 1 minute and 19 seconds down from Norris come the end of the race. I think he had a penalty or something as well in that. But you know what? Lawson just did the job. That's all he needed to do really, and just get the points on the board. Nico Hulkenberg, like we mentioned earlier, came home in eighth. Really good points for Audi, and finally a bit of luck for him this season, where he's managed to get the points scored. And Fernando Alonso in P9. What a drive from him. I mean, arguably in contention with him and Norris for driver of the day, because Fernando Alonso finally, Aston Martin, getting somewhere with that car, and he, you know, well and truly overdrove it, to be honest, to get into that position because there was quicker cars behind him, but did a great job with tires, and had a bit of margin at the end, and made a good overtake as well on Gasly, I think it was, during the race. There's an onboard where you can see the Alpine's got such better straight line speed, but Alonso was a bit clever with the way he placed the car for the corners, having a better chassis, you would say, it seemed, and managed to get the move done on Gasly. And it's only 2 points, but it's maybe the morale boost that team needed.
Yeah, that was a fantastic drive from Alonso, and uh, yeah, in a car that's still, I think, a work in progress. I think he's going to be pretty happy with that. Of course, he stayed out under the virtual safety car, which allowed him to get that track position. And yeah, I saw this clip where he was all over. I think it was the Williams
As Williams.
throughout the whole lap, and then as soon as they went on the straight, the Williams just absolutely flew away. So yeah, definitely still things to work on in terms of the engine, but they've got a good car, and I'm pretty sure Alonso said in an interview that he thinks they're up there with the best teams in terms of corner performance.
Wow.
So that is a statement for Aston Martin and Alonso, and I think that's Newey and Adrian Newey doing his work at that team, but they just need to find some engine performance. I'm pretty sure they said it was like 15 horsepower this weekend that they improved. They could go up to 30 horsepower, but they're a little bit scared about the reliability. So let's see if they bump that up for Monza, I reckon if it stays at 15 horsepower, they're going to really struggle at Monza. So we'll have to wait and see. But at this race, Alonso did a great job to hold off against the fast charging Gasly.
Yeah, if they can start to consistently score points, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much here because it could have just been a bit more trap specific here. But if Alonso could start just getting into them points, here and there, then they could suddenly start to make the season look a little bit more respectable. I mean, like, the way it was looking up until Spa, it was, an all time bad season. But now, like with these upgrades that they brought, it's, a bit of light at the end of the tunnel for them. Gazzy completed the points with just another solid drive from him. And he just finished ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, who I thought, you know what? He also had a really good weekend, considering he just jumped into that V carb and, had never driven these cars before. And in the end, he's beaten Lindblad on the Sunday and was very much at home in that midfield. And I actually thought, what a good thing to see. Like, he looked right back at it from the get-go.
Yeah, it was a really good performance from Sonoda this weekend. He was right in the mix with his teammate Lindblad all weekend. It's a shame for Racing Bulls that they didn't quite have the pace this weekend to really challenge the likes of Audi, because I think Audi have taken a huge step, and I think Alpine also have taken a step, and Racing Bulls have this weekend not quite had the pace. But yeah, it's good to see Tsunoda back. He made a really good move on Gasly into turn 7, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So it was good to see that. And let's just mention, it's so good to see that the race directors, the TV directors,
Oh my God,
finally started
yes.
showing the midfield
Yes.
battles.
I'm
When
so glad you said this.
Yeah, when I saw that, and it was an example. As soon as they started showing the midfield battles, we're seeing absolute historic scraps,
100%.
which we've just been missing this whole season. We've been seeing them after the race on social media, and we've been seeing them screen and screen. It's not the same, really, when it's screen and screen. So yeah, it was really good to see, and I hope that the F1 TV directors see the midfield scraps, and hopefully bring us more of that, because that was really, really good to see, really refreshing.
They finally listened. FOM have finally listened to the fans and people watching, because all my days of people complain about this all season long. And friggin' hell, how many times have we had races where we have just watched the top 4 teams or top 3 teams at the front of the field the whole race and nothing has happened, whilst there's been like a freeway scrap? I think it was Spa where we had like a free wide, moment going down, Kemmel Straight and all sorts kicking off there. And we never even saw it. And I'm so glad you said this, because you know what? I have probably asked for that race director or whoever it is to get the sack so many times. And finally, they did their job and they actually showed a bit of it. It's almost like they
Like
deliberately
the
were
bare
like,
minimum.
I know. Tell me about it. It was like they cut away from it eventually. They were like, okay, we've had
Yeah,
enough of this. Um, but you know what? We got something, and it was so almost deliberate as well. That it's like, oh, is this what you've been asking for? We've got a 5-way scrap here for
yeah.
like P11. Let's just watch this for like 2 laps, and then we'll go back to what we did.
Go back
Just
to
to
the
keep
time trial.
just to keep those plucky fans happy. And yeah, it was so good. And I really hope they just listen on this, because it never used to be like this. It never had this problem
Mm.
before, because they used to. I mean, I remember even like the early seasons of this decade, like 2020, 2021, where like you had a really, really close midfield. They'd show that. They'd show a lot of that where, there's really good battles throughout the midfield. But for some reason, this season in particular, Ewan, they've been obsessed with like sticking to the front, and there's nothing been happening anyway. So yeah, credit to them. Great decision.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's very unusual because we have only been seeing the top 4 drivers, top 4 teams really, and nothing's really at times not really been going on. I think the FOM are too scared to miss something in this generation of cars because we've seen how unpredictable the battery has been. I think they're just really scared
Yeah.
to miss something at the front. So I think that's part of it. Because I remember like 2022, I think I was like Imola. We were watching just like Hamilton try get stuck in the midfield for like 13th for like literally like 40 laps.
Yeah.
But now we don't see 13th for a long time. But um, yeah, it is refreshing, and we saw a really good battle to mix it up, and that just it just completely upped the enjoyment level of that race by like a lot, by like a good 20% because it was good. And when nothing is really going on at the front, just show us a midfield because there is some really good scraps back there, some really good moves going on. They've got there's some really aggressive drivers down there that will go for moves. So yeah, really really good to see, and let's hope they continue.
Absolutely. And yeah, you know what? He- Like, hopefully, this is a new thing now. They've learned their lesson and they keep this going for future because it will make it so much better. But yes, it was very brief, but we did appreciate it. That is for sure. But apart from that, the only other thing that happened, we had the two Williams crash into each other towards the end of the race. Quite almost, you know, it was almost hilarious, how actually they had ended up plowing into each other whilst they were like miles off the points. But Carlos Sainz having a big old lock up, plowing into Alex Albon, who in the end retired from the race anyway. But just salt in the wounds for Williams right now. I mean, they're very much now the second worst team on the grid, let's say.
Yeah, yeah, and they're only 8 points ahead of Aston Martin, which is
Yeah.
honestly quite a bit, really, considering that they're only getting low points, but it's still not that much. Only 8 points, and Aston Martin, who have been 4 seconds off the pack for pretty much the whole season, they're only 8 points off. It just shows how Williams have consistently been just very slow. And of course, Science going into Albon at the end there, just giving them more damage, which is not ideal for Williams, who desperately need to be focusing on upgrades. They're going to have to pay that damage. So yeah, I think it was a sting for the weekend for Williams, but we haven't seen much more from them yet. And I think both Sainz and Behrman in the Haas, they both specifically, they both had really bad weekends. I would say Behrman off the pace from his teammate Ocon. Ocon actually having a good weekend, and I think he needs it if he wants to stay in F1 at this point.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, that's your lot for the Dutch Grand Prix. We're going to very swiftly move on to the Italian Grand Prix. If you are watching this podcast in full, then just imagine that this is like a week ahead now, and then suddenly now we're predicting the Italian Grand Prix here. But we're going to combine the two into this podcast, and it'll be just a pretty short preview. This one compared to normal, because we are a little bit further out. But it is the 2026 Italian Grand Prix this weekend coming. It's going to be the homecoming, if you like, for Kimi Antonelli, because obviously this is going to be his first home race where he could genuinely win the race. Or could he? Because now we have found out he's going to be taking a grid penalty for the Italian Grand Prix. And Toto Wolff is essentially confirmed it's going to be to the very back of the grid. Of the time of recording, that's what we know. By the time you'll be listening to this, it'll probably be a bit different. But what do you think of that, Ewan? They're saying that this is the best circuit for them to do this, but it is potentially denying Antonelli, when he's having such a fantastic season, a potential home victory.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's quite bold from Mercedes to do that for Kimi, but it was obviously necessary and needed for Kimi Antonelli. And he's gonna be fired up, I think. Starting from the back, I think, of course, the top four teams are so clear from the rest. So I think getting up to the likes of seventh, maybe eighth, will be relatively easy if he stays out of trouble. At that point, then we see the Mercedes pace. At that point, but yeah, it's a tough one for Antonelli. But I think he's going to be pretty quick. I think Mercedes are going to be rapid around this track. So um, yeah, I expect Antonelli to be quick. Let's just see if he has the pace to really challenge the top five.
Well, the other scenario here is if the Mercedes is super quick and George Russell ends up having a bit more reliability issues, there's still a scenario where, dare I say it, Antonelli could still come back through and be challenging for the win, which sounds crazy to say, but the pace advantage that Mercedes have had, particularly with battery this season, I still wouldn't rule it out. You know, there's always the chance, but we are also expecting Ferrari to bring the first major engine upgrade in a bit of a while at the Italian Grand Prix, as they tend to do. How do you think their chances fare for the Italian GP? Because they always seem to do this. They always seem to save their upgrades until they rock into Monza, and it's like, let's make sure we do a good job this weekend, no matter how good of a season we're having.
Yeah, I think it looks like it's going to be a reported 10 horsepower um, engine upgrades. So relatively substantial, and I think they're going to have a good weekend. And I expect it to be Mercedes versus Ferrari this weekend if it is going to be a fight, because I think Mercedes is going to have the performance over everyone else, and I think McLaren just won't have pace around a track like this. I think it's too battery dependent, and it's too straight line dependent, and McLaren are super strong in high speed, and there's not much high speed here in Monza. So, yeah, I expect Mercedes to be quick. I expect Ferrari to also have some pace, and let's just see if this engine upgrades brings them on par with Mercedes.
Yes, because like if McLaren could win at Monza, well then I really
I'm
do
talking.
think no, I think that's a serious statement. If McLaren win um at Monza with Norris particularly again, then the championship's on. 100% for me, the championship's on because then I mean, yeah, that's music to your ears probably, but like I think they can win then at any circuit. You know, you've gone and won at Hungary, Zandvoort, and Monza. I mean, you know, they could win anywhere, and that would send fear in Mercedes, to be honest, because it's like, oh, McLaren are genuinely quick everywhere. But that's a big, big if. You know, like you say, they're this is not a track that suits them at all in terms of the characteristics of that car. Um, so we'll see. I'm actually almost really interested to see how they do because if they are really good, then strap yourselves in, folks. There's still plenty of the season to go, you know, and the comeback's on. But um, but we'll see. I think you're probably going to be right. I think it's Mercedes Ferrari for this one. Speaking of which, let's predict it. Who do you think is going to be on pole position for the 2026 Italian Grand Prix?
I think pole position will be George Russell. I think Russell will have the speed. Wait, are we counting Antonelli if he gets
I was thinking
pole?
that in my
But
mind. Not really. We can't say he can
okay,
get pole. I mean, I might think he might still get first in terms of quickest time, but he
right.
won't be on pole because he's got the penalty. So I think
All right.
Antonelli's ruled out.
Yeah, so I'll go Russell then. Like we said, I think Mercedes will just have the superior pace this weekend, and I think that's probably a safe bet. And I think Antonelli will also have the pace and be right on the pace because he has a fresh engine for Monza. And when you say fresh engine for Monza, you're thinking he's going to be an absolute rocket ship. So that's what I'm expecting from Antonelli. But yeah, let's just wait and see.
Yes, it's putting fear into me for Ferrari's hopes here. But yes, I agree. I think Russell will get pole. I think this, if he doesn't get pole, then you know, real missed opportunity. This is us thinking that Ferrari's upgrade is not going to be like an absolute game changer here, and if it is very, very good, then this obviously changes this massively, and then Ferrari will very much be a threat. Ferrari have gone quite well at high speed circuits this season, so they could still be a bit of a surprise to Merck. But yeah, I'm saying Russell as well for pole over one lap. He shouldn't not get pole here. What about your podium? I think this could be a bit more tricky.
Yeah, I'm gonna go third Hamilton, second Leclerc, first Russell.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Russell will hold on. I think Antonelli, if what I'm thinking is going to be the car performance, I think Antonelli has a chance of fourth in this race. I think McLaren are going to be quite a way off, but yeah, like you said, if they are in the mix, then uh, championship is on, and that would be good to see. But yeah, I think realistically they're going to struggle. So yeah, I think Ferrari will have good pace. I think Hamilton will do a good job. Leclerc will have good pace. He always has good pace at Monza, but Russell will be able to hold on. What about you?
Hmm. I'm going quite bold here. Um, I'm saying in third place, Kimi Antonelli. I think he will absolutely charge through that field and end
Yeah.
up on the podium, which will send the Italian fans wild, by the way, if he is on the podium. And yeah, I just think yeah, you should be able to work for it. This is all again if it's a dry race and everything. Second place, I've got George Russell, because I think he'll get pole, but he could have a bit of an issue. Maybe something along the way could hamper him when he should be winning this race. And I think Charles Leclerc is going to win the Italian Grand Prix once again. And I don't know, this is again probably wishful thinking, but he's done this before when he's not necessarily should have won this. I'm thinking 2024 when they didn't necessarily have a great qualifying and the car wasn't necessarily the quickest on that day. The McLarens were better, but with good strategy and good driving as well, he managed to get the job done and hung on with the tyres. And I'm just getting a bit of that vibe. I think Leclerc, after the season he's had, could win this race, even if the car's not ultimately the fastest. Um, he does seem to go very well at Monza. Um, Before you ask me, in case you do ask me, I've not got Hamilton on the podium because I actually think he could have some reliability issues because he's not had any at all this season, which I think is like nobody else has had that. So it's going to happen at some point. And I think,
Yeah,
yeah, that could happen.
could do.
Maybe. This is a lot of ifs and buts there, but that's what I'm
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah. I do got to say though, it would be pretty spectacular if Hamilton in the Ferrari would win in front of the Tifosi.
Yeah.
I
Could you
think
imagine?
that would be quite the spectacle for racing if that happens. So yeah, that'd be cool. But I do get what you're saying. I think Mercedes have been quite unoptimized with their races and their weekends recently. Like uh, just in Zandvoort last time out, they had really good pace, but they weren't able to optimize that. And in qualifying, they weren't able to optimize that either, really. So, yeah, I think there's still some mistakes. And of course, Antonelli made that mistake in the sprint qualifying. So, yeah, I think Russell and Antonelli are struggling slightly, and the strategy is not optimized either. So, could be, but I think Mercedes will have superior pace to the Ferrari, but I do think Ferrari will be pretty strong.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I'd say, you know what? Bit of a wild take this one. Outside bet, I wouldn't rule out Verstappen on the podium. I think the Red Bull with their Macarena wing, if they use that, but they could use it at a circuit like this. I think they could be very competitive at Monza because you think how massive that rear wing is when they've got that particular one that they used at I think it was Miami and places like that. Could be an outside bet of sneaking onto the podium. Um, And I think like people like Verstappen, you forget about him because he just had a non-existent race because he crashed out at Zandvoort. But he has had quite a few podiums so far this season. So, um, but we'll see. I think it's, you know what? I think it should be a really interesting weekend because we're going to a very different circuit, and we've had quite a few upgrades since we last had a high-speed track. So that could maybe give us a bit of a surprise order at the front. You know, maybe not. We could say all this, and then we could be completely wrong, couldn't we?
Yeah, 100%. We've seen how the upgrades have changed things in this season. Like it seems like it always does in every season, which is great. It keeps us on on our toes, and things can change in this sport, and that's the beauty of it, I think. So yeah, it could be good. It could be good for Verstappen. Of course, Red Bull do have a good engine. Um, I just I don't know. I see him if he has another spin. He's had he's at like 6 spins in the last five. I could see him spinning at Parabolica.
I was gonna say which corner is he gonna spin at? Yeah, Parabolica
Yeah.
maybe. Ascari. That's probably another sketchy bit.
Mm,
I think the first 3 quarters of the lap he's probably all right, but then
he's
once he gets
safe,
to
yeah.
about the last 3 or 4 corners, he's starting to get in a bit of trouble there.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Who knows? He might just be ready to risk it all, but it should be a very exciting Italian Grand Prix as always, and we will look forward to that when it comes along. Right, that is your lot for today's bumper episode with a full review and preview for you all to listen to. Thank you very much, Ewan. Pleasure as always. If you've enjoyed this episode and you're watching on YouTube, thank you for subscribing to the channel. We are well over 1,100 subscribers now, so thank you to you all who are subscribing. And if you're listening on your audio platform of choice, you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you choose to get your F1 Republic podcasts. Right, we will be back next, well, at the time of recording, the week after the next, but if you're listening to the Italian preview, then next week, if that makes sense, for our review of the Italian Grand Prix, and then we'll be looking ahead to the Madrid GP, which is actually not too far away, and they actually already had some F3 cars going around the circuit, so it is remarkably only a few weeks away until we'll be looking ahead to that one. But we'll see. Will it be a home win for Ferrari or Antonelli, or could George Russell or McLaren spoil the Italian party? We'll find out, and we'll see you in the next one.